My name is Jake Strawn. I have been working with Drupal about 4.5 years now. And about a year and a half ago, I attended D4D in Boston and sort of got some new ideas for the way I wanted to take my own work and the things that I wanted to be able to do for the community. And one of the biggest problems that I always had was somebody would give me a design to theme out a site, and every time I was using a different tool. It was the Zen theme, or it was taking Garland and starting from scratch. And I had previously discovered the 960 grid. And what I will be talking about today is focused on the 960 grid. There are kind of plans maybe to implement some other grid systems. But as I looked at each of those, I personally chose the 960 grid and really liked the way the framework applied CSS for the layouts. And as far as this presentation today, there's not many slides. A lot of what I'll be doing is a demonstration on a live site that I put together last night. Well, not live, local, actually. But moving on. Omega is the implementation that I created after I had this itch. And I wanted my own base theme to start with every time I had a project. I didn't want there to be any exceptions. I always wanted to be able to kind of start from the same place and have a good framework to continue on and to quickly get a site themed out. So Omega is an advanced implementation of the 960 grid. There were a couple of implementations prior. The 960 theme itself was the first to do such in Drupal, and it basically gave the core framework, but you still had to understand a lot of the back end. You really had to be able to dig in, get into the code to implement your grid template, size things, and lay them out the way you want. So Omega's goal was to alleviate that and make it so that anybody either building the site or that once you hand off the site to a client, if that client wants to just change the width of a sidebar and make it just a little bit bigger, it shouldn't be a huge process. It shouldn't need a developer to come in and start editing template files. It should be something they can quickly manage. One of the other pieces I'll be talking about is a module that has also been in my head kind of in line with this base theme for the past year and a half. But actually its first working version was released about a week and a half ago, just prior to this. And that's called the Delta module, and you'll see both of those working here soon. And with that said, let's go to a demo. Okay, so what you see here, and keep in mind a base theme in Drupal, where if you are downloading Drupal for the first time, and in Drupal 7, your Bartik is the default theme, or Drupal 6 or prior, it was Garland. Those themes have visual presentation that's kind of meant to just, if you don't want to spend any time, here's your site, put in some content, let it go. The idea of a base theme is something that is as plain as it can be, doesn't necessarily implement any design, but just gives you that framework again. So what you're looking at here is a basic install of Drupal 7 with the Omega theme. There are a couple of content types that I will kind of describe here in a moment, and some dummy content placed throughout the site. And with the Omega theme, there are, I don't even know, 1,600 regions for you to place content. In the upper section, there's in the Drupal 7 version is a little nav bar that you can place your user login or the user links and search bar, and they fit kind of nice at the top of the screen. Had a lot of requests for that. And then moving down, what we see is placeholder blocks that are, for my demonstration and when I actually develop with the Omega theme, I use these just so I kind of know where all my regions are, I can quickly see them. So there's a header region, there's preface. Moving down, we have the sidebars and main content. And then going to the bottom of the page, there's postscript and footer. These are the default regions that come in Omega. And I actually took my idea of what all of these default regions should be from, I believe it was Aqua Marina in Drupal 6 that did it first. And just putting in all of these regions there's rarely a case these days when I'm doing a project that I need any more than this. With this default set of regions and the appropriate settings, I can lay out almost any design that somebody will give to me. And for this demonstration, again, this is Drupal 7. There is a Drupal 6 version of Omega, but it's not nearly as advanced. The stuff you see here is strictly for 7. And I've been working on that version now for over 9 months on Drupal 7, and it's had a quote-unquote stable release for at least 6 months, as stable as it could be with Drupal 7 just now being officially released. But one of the first things you notice, how many of you have had a chance to install Drupal 7, play with it? Okay. You know, some of the new things that went into Drupal 7 were the toolbar at the top and the overlay. Those are actually a couple things I turn off instantly every time I install Drupal 7. Personally not a fan, maybe it's just because I haven't got used to it yet. But so I disabled those, and it's without those pieces there and you first look at it, you might not even really think it's Drupal 7, but it is. So moving into this demonstration, what we have on this home page, I've created 3 test views to just output some content. And this is a table of just all the recent content on the site. And I've created 2 custom node types, a simple blog entry and a press release. And what I always had a problem with in theming and trying to do something quickly is that how many times do you want your homepage to be laid out one way, the blog section of your site, you know, you want your sidebars together, but everywhere else there's split sidebars, one on either side. You really want the ability to, for different, maybe just one page, or for a whole section, or just the homepage. You want to be able to lay things out differently, and that should be easy and not necessarily require something like panels. And I am a fan of panels. I've used it in the past, and it's highly useful and is a revolutionary piece of code for Drupal. But I find that handing off something like that to a client will pretty much give them a heart attack. It's never turned out well if I gave a client the ability to edit panels, or even try to explain how the hell to use them in the first place. So what I wanted to be able to do is put some of those same kind of features into the theme and then the module that I will show here, giving anybody who can access the interface and just look at a simple form the ability to change the layout anywhere they want. So again, this is the default layout if you install the Omega theme. The sidebars are on either side and all the regions are appropriately placed. And if I come in the main navigation to the blog post page, we see this layout still the same. I have teaser views here for a small number of nodes, and then the press releases is going to be exactly the same. So consider this just a very simple site, a couple of content types, and what I want to be able to do with this is not use this layout for any of these sections, and that's what I will try to demonstrate here. Backtracking for 1 second, on base themes. Like Drupal core, you should not hack a base theme. You don't download the Omega theme and start editing its files. It's meant to sit behind the scenes and power a sub-theme. And that goes for anything, for Zen, for Fusion, for any of the popular base themes out there. You create a sub-theme. And like the popular ones, Omega comes with a starter kit. And if I come to the appearance page in Drupal 7, it's admin/appearance. This is where the themes are listed. And we can see here the one that's currently enabled is the Omega starter kit. And again, in default settings. Another question, how many of you have used Drush? Okay, how many of you heard of Drush? Not bad. The first thing I am going to demonstrate is actually, because the starter kit when you download it lives in the same location as the Omega files. You don't really want to edit that, because if you update the Omega theme later, there's an update, it's going to overwrite the starter kit and destroy your theme. So for this example, I am going to use Drush to create a sub-theme. I've also put out a lot of modules, and I do have one that's Omega Tools. And it only does a few small things, like the default placeholder blocks you saw. It puts those on the page. And it also gives a fancy Drush command that will allow you to quickly make a sub-theme. The font looks big enough. So I want to create a sub-theme named Drupal Camp Western Mass. And it's going to be this simple. We type in Drush, Omega sub-theme, and then in quotes, the pretty name of the theme. And it tells me that now I have the sub-theme configured and ready to use. And you can also see where it's taken the pretty name with spaces and capital letters I did and given it a system name as well. So if I look in my Sites All Themes folder, well, let's see there. That's interesting. There should kind of be a new theme in there. Oh, okay. Thank you. The name was so long, I actually couldn't see it on my screen. The text was too big. I don't know. Okay, so we do have the folder there. We've now actually created a sub-theme that just took a copy of the starter kit, which is everything you need to start creating your theme. There it is. So coming back to my appearance page, if I refresh this, now we still have Omega starter kit as the default, and now we have our custom sub-theme to start with. So I am going to enable, set that as default. And now if we visit the home page, nothing blew up, thankfully. Everything still looks the same. Once again, default settings. So now that I have my sub-theme created, I'm ready to go in and start configuring things, changing things. The Omega theme has probably more settings than any theme ever created for Drupal. And again, this was going back to really wanting to put everything in your hands, make everything configurable. And as we first look at this page, can everybody see that, or should I zoom in a little? We're good? Okay. First thing we see on here are some default settings. And the 960 grid the defaults were always 12 and 16. Last year, a 24 column grid was added to that. And I've actually added in this Drupal 7 version a 32 column grid. The 12 and 16 have 940 pixels of usable space. 24 and 32, with the margins that apply through each column, have just a little more at 950. It also has the ability, the default is always the 960 width content. There is also a fluid width version of all of those. So a lot of people that were, I guess, hesitant to use a grid system for its, very strict 960 pixels, this kind of takes that away. It uses the same concept, but instead uses percentages and will give you a full width site. But on the left side, you can see all these sections: user zone, branding, header, preface, content, etc. These are the same things we saw on the page where all the blocks were placed. And in each of these regions, each of these zones that I click into, we now see a wide assortment of settings. The first, you can quickly enable or disable a zone for the first checkbox. You can choose to provide a full width wrapper around it. Another issue that I found, not personally once I was comfortable with the 960 grid, but a lot of people didn't understand that they get a design and something's hanging off, still centered on the page, but it's hanging outside the content. Simply checking that box is going to give you a full width so you can put in a background that's going to lay outside of your grid. For each section, you can again choose the columns for that. Every other grid theme in Drupal uses a set number of columns throughout the whole site. In Fusion, you can go in and select 12 or 16, and that applies to everything. There are reasons when you would want to mix and match those in order to, let's see, if you wanted three regions that were equally spaced across the top of your site, you're going to have to use a 12-column grid and make them 4 columns each. And then there are certain situations where you can only accomplish certain layouts with 16. But with Omega, you can mix and match these in each of your regions. And as we see, moving down, we see the 2 regions listed, user bar first and user bar second. These are the defined regions, and each have their own width. And eventually, and you'll see this at the end as I show some screenshots of what it is going to still become, you can take and select each of these. So if I wanted to, this is 16, so if I wanted to make those equal width, I can just change the width through that form and save it. And that's now going to make that very top search and navigation bar be split in the middle rather than heavy to one side. And this continues as you go through each of these zones. The groups of regions are placed into zones, and this will give you the ability to configure the entire group and then the individual regions inside of that. So I'm not going to take too long on that top section for the moment, because I'll make some setting adjustments in a minute that you'll see and maybe get a little better idea. Some of the other features that come in, built in the new Drupal 7 version of Omega, there actually is quite a bit of CSS applied to just give it a little bit cleaner feel than plain text like Zen out of the box with no styles. But you can actually disable all of those CSS files that Omega includes right through this form. The reset, text, tables, everything's split so that you kind of understand, well, if I turn off menus, it's probably going to get rid of the menu styling. You can customize things like the text that belongs in the search box, where here I just have a default search. You can do custom page titles. So if, let's see, on your front page, you can choose between those options. And then on all of your other internal pages, you can do something different. Breadcrumb settings, how to display a breadcrumb and append the title and include the home link. And what do you want for the separator can all be configured through this form. The new version of Omega has CSS Dropdown Menus by default. And the way to enable those is just by selecting the depth of the menu you want to show. Omega does also have built-in grid debugging, and I will turn this on to save it. You can enable the grid debugging. You can select which roles can see the grid overlay during development. And I don't need that. I'll actually just go ahead and save this. Come back to the home page so we can see what happened here. Now we can see the overlay on each region. And again, the zones are all separate, and you can configure 12, 16, how many ever columns you want throughout each group of regions. Each group of regions has its own overlay. Like if you see the very top bar, the one that we adjusted the size of, where now the menu items are appearing about halfway in the center there, you can see the grid overlay is different than the logo and title area right below that. The top one's a 16-column grid, the second is a 12. Okay, but for the first portion of this, what I want to do is, since on this home page I have a big table and not much content in the sidebars, I think for this home page example, I'm going to turn off, I want to get rid of the header and preface regions and the sidebars even. I really don't want to display those on the home page. I just want this cool big table. Because everybody loves tables. I mean, how do you not? So this is where, like the settings I just made are site-wide. That was the default theme settings. And any theme that provides those types of settings, it's that way. They apply for the whole site. This is where the second piece of this comes in, the Delta module. And back on the theme listings page, there's an option at the top for Delta. And first thing we see is a list of themes that it will let us work with. And we have the starter kit, and I want to select the new sub-theme we just created. And from there, just for reference, as I mentioned, I turned off the toolbar, and I also use the Rubik theme for administrative interfaces. So if that looks wildly different to everybody, it's the one I prefer. So that's why it's a little different than the 7 theme out of the box in Drupal, but all the concepts are the same. So in the secondary nav below Delta, we have layouts. And we now see the multiple themes that I've selected that I can manipulate with this module. And what I want to do is add a template. And I'm going to name this No Sidebars. And I'm going to specify that it's for this specific theme. And now we've saved it, and it lets me know that I've created a custom layout. I've created the container for that, and it's taken me back to the same form we were just looking at. Well, what this is doing, and we're on a completely different page while we're still in the theming section, what this has done is take all of the advanced themes that give you all the power for the Omega theme. It's making a copy of those, and it's going to let us take and configure this copy however we want and save it. So let's say I want to get rid of that top bar. I'm going to leave the logo and items that are in the branding zone. I'm going to disable the header, disable the preface. And in the content zone, that's where I wanted to get rid of my sidebar, so that table is going to just look awesome. So I'm going to take and set my sidebar, the second and the first, to a width of 0, which I think makes me think they're just not going to show up. And I'm going to save this layout. Now that we have this saved, when I was conceiving of how to build this, there was a lot of back and forth between the voices in my head that didn't really know the best way, now that I've made this copy, how to apply them to the page, how to make the site understand that on the home page I want to do something different. The best way, and I think most people will agree, once I made this first portion work, was to integrate directly with the context module. How many of you have heard of or used context? Okay. The context module allows you to do different things on different places of your site. Essentially, what I'm talking about with the theme. You may place different blocks in different regions using the context module. You can specify the way you want your breadcrumb to, where in the menu path you want your breadcrumb. So context already gives the back end that says when we're on a specific page or we're on a specific type of node to do something. So I have already, for the purposes of this, created 3 example contexts. And I'm going to go ahead and come into the one that I created for the front page. And without going deep into context, I look at this and I click on what's a condition. And this is the condition that has to be met for whatever we're going to explain for it to happen. So in this case, I've chosen a path. I want a specific path, and then I want something to happen. So here I have defined the front page as the condition for that. Below, we have reactions, and this is what we do. We either place new blocks somewhere, we select an active menu item. And in this option now, we have the Delta module. And we have a simple, since we've only created one, we have one option here, no sidebars. And I'm going to select that and save my context. So now here again, it's the home page as we saw it a moment ago. And if I refresh, I still have grid debugging turned on. Refresh, the top bar is gone, the header and preface is gone, sidebars are gone. I have a completely new layout. I left the lower regions there. But now, I guess just to kind of ensure that that worked, if I click into one of these nodes, well, everything's back. Taking the default settings, the default layout that I've configured in the back end is going to apply to anything that I don't have a special use case for. So if I come back again to my settings, I am going to now make a new layout. We'll go this time with the press release. I think a lot of sites I see, I don't really like it, but you'll see a press release and God, there's nothing on the site. There's no styling. There's no anything. It's just the content of the press release. So I want to try to replicate that here. So again, I don't really want that top bar, any of these other regions. I'll leave the logo there, I guess. But I'm going to turn off otherwise almost everything, including the lower regions. I'm going to get rid of the sidebars again because that's just taking away from the content I want to display. But now what if I do want to make this plain, no styles, anything? I'll leave the reset CSS on, but I'm going to turn off all the default styles. And actually, I'm going to turn off the grid debugging in this example. Okay, so I've created my new layout. If we come back here, in the Delta interface, we see the first one we created with no sidebars, and now this custom one for press releases. And so for again, to tell the site where we want to implement this, because all we have right now are the settings stored and ready to use. What I have is in this custom context for the press release section, I've told it that if the path is press, or anything starting with press essentially, or also a press release node type, I'm going to fire this condition. And I've even in the setting up of this, I also selected a breadcrumb and menu to be selected. I want to come back to the reaction and select Delta. And now I have the two that we have available. And I want to select press releases. And the home page is again what we were looking at before. And if I click into the press release section, wow, no CSS. Looks amazing. And is exactly what I expected. So if I actually now click into the press release node, that's all I have. I left on the logo and title area, and then some of the default items in Drupal, the tabs. Otherwise, all that's on this page is the content of this page, the comments, the form. So, last quick example. And forgive me, I'm trying on the fly to kind of think of different ways to lay out these sections so that it's visible what's going on here. I'm going to add a new template. And this one I'm going to make specific for my blog section. I think for this one, I will leave pretty much everything turned on, but what I want to do is reconfigure my content. On the default view, it was sidebar, content, sidebar. A lot of blogs, you'll see the content comes first and then two sidebars, so that's what I want to replicate. And here, for the content zone or anything that's selected dynamic, you can reorder the positioning that these regions are in. And in the 960 grid, that uses the push and pull classes. It applies content first ordering. So in your source code, your content comes first. It should always for SEO purposes. Then your sidebars come in. but depending on where you want them, you can quickly move them around using the order here. So right now we see, and they're kind of backwards the way they appear on screen, we can see sidebar first is coming first, but I want to make that the second item, and I want to make the content the first item. So it should be now content, sidebar first, and then sidebar second. I'll leave everything else as it is, save the layout. And the last thing, one last time, I will come back to context, to this section that's telling me anytime there's a node type of blog, or anytime the path starts with blog, I'm going to add a reaction and use our cool blog layout. So again, homepage, our awesome table, click into the blog section, and now we see the content first and 2 sidebars. So actually in this demonstration, I've kind of negated what the default settings are. I'm not even using them. For this demonstration, every section that's on this site is using a custom layout. So my front page is different. I don't have any sidebars. My blog, the sidebars are in a different location. And the press releases, I turned off all my CSS and took basically everything off the page except the content. Okay. For the purposes of that, that really covers the basic usage. And I know that was quick. But using the grid takes away all the struggles of needing to worry about why your sidebar's wrapping in IE6, if anybody still even has that browser. It takes all the struggles that personally as the themer, and hopefully anybody that's ever used CSS has struggled with that. Do I use negative margins? How do I do this? How do I get that sidebar the exact right size? The grid gives you this, and combining Omega and Delta gives you the ability to start changing things site-wide. And where I kind of mentioned before, in my own usage now, I no longer have the need for panels, because in panels, you're going to place content and views in a specific way and create your little layout in there. And in my own opinion, and again, thinking that panels is an amazing piece of technology and is still needed on a lot of sites, with this, I'm keeping everything separate. I'm keeping my theme layer separate. That's Omega. And I'm not using a module with a complicated interface to give a user the ability to place and move things around how they want. In my opinion, the way context works, and again, applying these layouts to different sections, you can do the same thing with blocks. And I believe that to place your content on the site in Drupal, you should be using either the default Drupal block manager, which works fine, or context, which is going to give you the ability to place it in a different region. So one thing you can't do in core Drupal is you want to put a block in the sidebar, it's in the sidebar. Well, what if on the other section you want that to go in the footer? Well, you can't really do that unless you're writing some back-end code that's going to move it around for you. So a thing like context is what gives you that ability to place content however you need in any section of your site. So I'm leaving Omega and Delta as the pieces that handle the visual representation of the site, the layout, and how everything's going to look on the page, how everything's going to be sized. The next portion is really quick. You're going to see a lot of wireframe screenshots that demonstrate the next phase. As I said, I've been working on part of this for about a year and a half, and the forms I quickly demonstrated. If you do at some point take a look, there's a lot of form options there. You're having to select and actually do math. You know, if you've selected a 16-column grid and you've got 2 things in it, it's going to be best if you can add to 16, and not necessarily everybody can. So the goal has always been that I would create an interface on top of all of that. Building the form in Drupal that works the way it currently does is the first piece in actually making it function the way it needs to. The second, the less important but very nice idea is to have a very slick interface to lay on top of that. Once again, kind of like panels. So as we saw, like all of the regions and zones, the regions are grouped into zones. And these are actually all defined in your .info file of your theme. And not everybody who might want to change the sidebar width or put content in a certain location would know how to go in there and know how to update that. And the first couple screenshots here demonstrate adding new regions and zones on the fly. And it's hard to see because I don't have a little mouse pointer in there. Top right, there's a link for add a zone. That's what was just clicked. Now you can type in a zone name. And wow, we've got a whole new section available for the site. And mind you, this is concept. This is going to take a lot of code and jQuery to accomplish. Now if I click on the add a new region, wow, I want to add a 16th sidebar to my site. You have the ability to do that with just a few clicks. And this would also give the ability, how do I move my logo down? How do I get that somewhere else? You can take a region and simply drag it to another zone. You can reorder it in the zone that it's currently in. And as I do, and again, I apologize, try to go quickly through some of these. The things that I'm demonstrating in these wireframes are possible already by just the settings, either in the form or in the .info file of an Omega subtheme. So here we're dragging the region around, putting it somewhere else. We were set back and we see nice little setting menus to enable and add classes and all these things. The same thing on a region. That first one's for the whole zone. Next one's for a specific region. So here's the way I quickly turn off that sidebar. Dynamic zones. As I didn't try to get into the definition a moment ago, in the grid system, and traditionally these were applied to your two sidebars and your content. On a certain section of your site, you may have no block showing up in a sidebar. Well, you don't want an empty space there. So in 960, in the first implementation in Drupal, a function was created that allowed for contextual widths in 960. So if I were to have a 12-column layout, everything is 4 columns, but on one of those pages, my sidebar is empty, I want that one that's the primary content to fill up the rest of the space. So that's what a dynamic zone is. You define something as the primary container in that zone. So with 2 sidebars and content, it's going to be content. And then when any of the other regions aren't present, like as we saw in the homepage demonstration where I turned off the sidebars, I didn't actually change the width. I didn't tell it to make the content the full width. It just did that because the other sidebars were gone and the content was the only thing there. And by setting something as a dynamic zone, a dynamic group of regions, they always appear in line. In that way, that they're magically sized on the back end and fit into the 960 container. This example shows, again, a very wild concept of how an interface on top of that form will look. So we have our 2 sidebars and content, and then we have there dragging the sidebar, dragging the width of the sidebar and making it wider. The little links in between the regions kind of define that either they're physically linked together, like don't move them, or move them together, or kind of let them go separately. So we can see on the sidebar first, they're not linked. So I wanted to actually create some space there. So if I unlink those and then shrink the content a little, there you go. And these all can be defined through the prefix and suffix classes in the 960 grid. And now, if I come back after I made that movement, the little link was unclicked and they're not linked together. But I decided to go ahead now, and I did want that space in there, but I've locked them back together again. So now as I move them, they move together. And we again have some settings for the zone. Again, all of these are currently in the form, but this is throwing them in the interface that makes it a little easier to use. So here you could quickly select, I want this to be 16 or 24 columns. And this shows switching between 12 and 24. The sizing and the margins change on those two grid layouts, but you can quickly do that to an entire group of regions. The static zones are the most traditionally used. What they allow you to do is take each region, give it a size, and if you had 5 or 6 regions grouped together with grid classes from the 960 grid, as soon as it reached kind of the end of the container, end of the 16-column grid, it's going to wrap down to the next line. So you can take and create 2 that are the same width and have 1 fall below it, and then 2 or 3 more. This really is the most common, but it doesn't give the contextual sizing. So if a region's empty, it's empty, and everything shifts accordingly. So here's an example with four regions in the PostScript section. And what we're doing here is actually going to make all of these on the top row the same size. So each of them drag independently, and now we have all 4 of our regions equal. Now if we want to move something to the next row, create a new row, be able to simply drag and drop. But you see, again, nothing magically changed size. So I'm going to make my next one a full width. And I'm going to take and shift all those back out to where they're now three regions equal width. So the wireframes you just saw, again, wrapping up, was the interface. It will be called the Omega UI that will lay on top of these 2 modules, on top of the Omega theme and on top of the Delta module. So anytime that you came to that form with 1,400 form elements, form settings to configure, there will be an interface like that to lay on top, where you pull up in a new window, are able to drag and drop, resize regions, do things like that. Actually, one last thing. For those of you unfamiliar with what you can design in the grid, I've got a few examples right now that are using the Omega theme. Acquia recently launched, I believe this past week, a sub-site for their training. And that was on the Drupal 6 version. Mac Life magazine is using the Omega theme. And 2 days ago, Maximum PC is using it. My own personal blog, of course, has to use it. A designer in our New Hampshire Drupal group community. This one is actually on Drupal 7. And for more examples of that, 960.gs, for any further information on, I really didn't go too far into exactly what the grid is, exactly how that works, because again, my goal this entire time has been to create an interface that takes all that out of the equation. It just doesn't. Because even as a developer, when I first picked up the 960 grid and started doing some of these things, it was a little complex on the back end, making it work. So what the Omega theme does is just take all the thinking away, just give you a few options to select, and you have your layout. But on 960.gs, there is an amazing example of sites built with 960. And you can see the new Drupal.org is using it's a customized 960 framework. And there's a lot of really beautiful sites here that can go to also take away some of the naysayers that think all grid themes look too boxy, because it's possible to really create an elegant design in a grid system. And there's actually 2 Drupal sites on this list, the Drupal.org and here 4 Kitchens, who've always been big proponents of the grid. So I think that's all I have. Any questions? Yes?
Can you do kind of fine-tune assignment of permissions for different parameters that you tell the client that they can adjust the font and the color, but not the width?
Traditionally in Drupal, the theme settings, which is what all the entire form that we saw is, in Drupal core, that's one permission that says they can mess with the theme. So, no, not really. That's really a good concept, though, because of, and the Omega theme does so much more than most themes do in the theme settings. It might be something very good to look at to, you know, maybe they can't mess up the content zone, but we'll let them play with the header if they want, or, you know, some kind of fine-grained permissions that go into that. That'd be good. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you start a site now, if you should use Drupal 7 versus Drupal 6. People have been saying stick with 6 for now, but then this does all the stuff in 7.
Yep.
What's your opinion?
My opinion is that Drupal 7 will work for 99% of sites right now. If you're building an e-commerce site, we're still waiting on Drupal Commerce to have a really good working base, even a good alpha version. I'm always personally a fan, though, of bleeding edge. I want to try it out. My own personal blog was in Drupal 7 since like one of the first or second alpha versions that was buggy. There are cases, I'm still getting, you know, clients coming to me and their whole framework's built in Drupal 6. So, you know, they can't switch yet. It would take, you know, too much time and effort. I think if you're building a new site, investigate at least. There may be some modules that aren't done, but I think all the important ones are there. Views is ready. Panels even has a working, I guess, working version. I haven't actually played with it in 7. But if you're currently on a Drupal 6 site, and like, do I need to go to Drupal 7 now? No, you don't. Drupal 6 does work, and you know, unless you just have the money to throw it, let's just migrate up to the next version. Right now, there's not much need for it. And that's usually the worst case is when you're trying to upgrade a site and replicate all the functionality is in 6. There's 20 modules that aren't created, even if some of that functionality is now in Drupal 7, it makes that tough. But I'm the biggest fan of Drupal 7, so there's a lot out there. I think there's already like 900 and something contributed projects with releases in Drupal 7. So it's come a long way since we switched from Drupal 5 to 6, and it took a year and a half for anybody to update their code. And I think that's kind of the way moving forward, is hopefully that people stay on the edge and continue to make sure their stuff's ready as soon as Drupal's ready.
It looks like there's some people out there doing interesting things with trying to find ways to make grid systems like 960 produce more or work with more semantic CSS,
Mm-hmm.
or semantic class management, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on that? It's one of the trade-offs with grid systems and CMS is
Right. Honestly, I haven't taken much time to really think into that. When I really discovered that I needed a grid, I checked out Blueprint. I thought they included too much extra junk. I didn't necessarily like the way it laid out. I forget, there was another one, the UE grid or something. I tried it. 960, it just clicked. It just clicked. I understood it. Yeah, I do understand some of the reasons that people still have issue. One of my biggest personally right now is as I'm trying to take even what comes in this base package for Omega, I need a really good mobile version. And on a smartphone, they all look pretty decent. But I've seen the ones, and I forget what they are, where you can take and just drag your screen, and as soon as it gets below like 480 pixels, boom, everything shifts into one column. And I forget, it's new, I believe, in the past year, and it's a new style of grid and I'm really hoping to look into that. Because when I first did Omega, I wasn't still 100% sold on 960, but it's just what I kind of decided to go with. I'd still like to, at some point, be able to, between just selecting, 12 or 16 column, why not use Blueprint, use 960, use your own. For the 32 column grid that I implemented, there's a link up here. I think it's this one. There's a link for a custom CSS generator that you put in how many columns you want, how big you want your gutters, generate it. And it does it all on the concept of 960. It uses the same sort of methodology, but so that's kind of my goal, is to where any grid framework could be applied into that, hopefully taking some of that away. So if one didn't provide everything that somebody needed or wanted or didn't work the way, here's another option. So.
You might have just answered this question. I apologize if you did.
That's good.
What I wanted to ask you, Dave, was so you're using the 960 grid system, and you could just go in and customize it some of the other, like Fusion, you can go on .info, and you can put in your own widths, and you can come up with 60 and call it 920 pixel wide grid system.
Right.
You display, for example, and just read out the .info file and have access to that. Is that something that we can do in the .info file?
Directly in the .info file, no. Would it be a quick adding one line in there and making that work? No. But at the same time, as I decided to generate that 32 column grid and include it, all I had to do was get my CSS file together, and then actually on the forms where you can select the width of those regions, I had to bump it up from 24 to go all the way down to 32, because the concept behind the CSS was the same. And all it's doing is adding that numerical value to the end of the grid dash 17, and then it's giving it the appropriate size and dimension. I kind of like that idea, because it would be possible to generate your own from this suggested generator that was as wide as you wanted it to be and do something similar. So it's close. I actually take that into consideration because I like that. Yeah. When I did the 32 column, and again, it's still the 960, I didn't do any different sizings, but I think 20 minutes, I generated it, had it in Omega, and had a whole new grid layout ready to go. So it's, yes, yeah. Yeah. Say that again? Color. That's the, let me come back just so I can. Again, kind of, out of the box, Bartik, Garland, all those do come with, some kind of visual representation. A base theme, even like, well, I guess Fusion does a little bit with integrating with Skinner, and that's why they don't have a very good 7 version yet, it's because Skinner's not ready. But out of the box, the base theme should really just be about the back end. Everything's here to let somebody quickly start implementing the design they want, the colors they want. I've had some people request actually integrating the color module to, like in Garland, change the gradient backgrounds and all those things. I haven't made a definite determination on that, but as a whole, out of the box, it's always going to be plain and simple because it's just focusing on the back end and then letting the designer, the themer, do whatever they want with that. Yes. Yes. Any other questions? Yes?
So trying to wrap my head around this Fusion, can you, and some of the other sort of options that are out there that questions, can you give just a quick kind of
Okay. Zen is the base theme that's been around forever. Drupal 4, I think there was Zen. It was the most basic vanilla thing out of the box and gave a few settings, like I showed, not even grid settings, but just a few settings, like change a breadcrumb. And Zen actually changed Drupal theming and sub-theming completely for everybody in Drupal. It's kind of become dated. It's a little empty. There's no features in it going forward. So I kind of see it, even though it still has the most installs because of Drupal 5 and 6, I see it kind of tailing off because everybody's starting to want this kind of power in a theme. Fusion actually hit about the same time I started working on Omega, with some of the same concepts I have, and I've actually spoken with them a couple times, just to give a little more power. You know, how wide do you want your site to be? You know, where do you want things to go? Fusion's became very well adopted in Drupal 6 with the top-notch themes and their whole movement, and they've done wonders as well for the Drupal community. There's a couple others like Genesis adaptive themes, all have some nice features, and I kind of think that's where it's going. Is like my goal was always like take something from Zen, take something from that theme, put them all together into what I want, and then just make it my own way. So there's definitely a lot of options out there for that. Anybody else? We done? Thank you.